Runaways expected capture. Instead, an American town welcomed them with food and shelter. The frost-covered ground crunched beneath Samuel Russell's bare feet as he stumbled through the darkness outside Boston in February 1851. Behind him, the baying of bloodhounds grew fainter with each desperate step. His lungs burned in the bitter cold, his clothes torn by thorns, his hands bleeding from climbing fences. For 3 weeks, he had been running from Virginia, expecting at any moment to feel the iron grip of slave catchers dragging him back to chains and whips. What he found instead, as dawn broke over Beacon Hill, would shatter everything he believed about survival in a world built to destroy him. A black woman named Harriet Hayden opened her door that morning to find a trembling, half-dead man on her doorstep. Instead of turning him away or demanding papers, she pulled him inside, sat him by a warm fire, and placed a bowl of hot soup in his shaking hands. As Samuel looked around the parlor, filled with other faces like his own, all eating breakfast together, all free, he realized he had discovered something that slaveholders' worst nightmares were made of: an entire community that said no to the machinery of human bondage. This is the untold story of how towns across the North became sanctuaries for freedom seekers, places where runaway slaves expected capture, but instead found hot meals, warm beds, and something even more precious: dignity. These communities didn't just hide fugitives in attics and cellars. They welcomed them as neighbors, gave them jobs, sent their children to school alongside white students, and when slave catchers came hunting, entire neighborhoods would rise up as human shields. What emerged was a network of resistance so powerful, it changed the course of American history. When freedom had an address, the mathematics of escape seemed impossible. By 1850, over 30,000 professional slave catchers prowled the countryside, each bounty worth more than most working men earned in a year. The Fugitive Slave Act had turned the entire United States into a hunting ground where even free-born black Americans could be kidnapped on any white man's word. Yet, into this nightmare landscape, certain places emerged as islands of safety. Boston's Beacon Hill housed over 2,000 free black residents. Philadelphia's expanding community included successful businessmen, teachers, and activists with their own churches and schools. But most remarkably, in Canada West Wilderness near Lake Erie, stood something that defied white supremacy itself: Buxton Settlement, a thriving town of over 1,000 formerly enslaved people who had not just survived, but prospered. Henry Bibb, who escaped Kentucky in 1837, described the journey's terror. The slave is ever looking over his shoulder, listening for horses' hooves, the crack of whips, dogs trained to tear human flesh. Every white face could be your captor. We traveled by night through swamps and forests, following the North Star, eating roots and berries, sleeping in caves. Reverend Jermaine Logan recorded arrival's conditions. They come starved, frozen, wounded, some barely alive. Mothers carrying children who haven't eaten in days. Men whose feet are bloody stumps from walking hundreds of miles without shoes. Yet in their eyes burns a fire that no master could extinguish: the determination to be free. The Hayden House, where gunpowder met mercy. At 66 Phillips Street in Boston, Lewis and Harriet Hayden operated what may have been the most audacious underground railroad station in America. Lewis had escaped slavery in Kentucky in 1844, leaving behind his wife and children to face whatever punishment his master might devise. But by 1850, his modest 3-story house had become a fortress of resistance that struck terror into the hearts of slave catchers throughout New England. The Hayden's method was as brilliant as it was dangerous. Beneath their front porch, they stored barrels of gunpowder. When federal marshals came hunting fugitives, Lewis would meet them at the door holding a lit candle, while Harriet stood behind him with another flame. Their message was unmistakable: attempt to seize anyone under their roof, and the house would explode, taking everyone with it. Theodore Parker, the radical Unitarian minister, witnessed one such confrontation in 1851. The marshal demanded entry, showing his warrant. Lewis Hayden smiled and showed his candle. "You are welcome to enter," he said calmly, "but understand that if you attempt to take any person from this house, I will drop this candle into the cellar, and we shall all meet our Maker together." The marshal studied Hayden's face and saw no bluff there. He withdrew. The Hayden's house became legendary throughout the Underground Railroad network. In 13 years of operation, they sheltered over 600 fugitive slaves, and not once did authorities successfully remove anyone from their protection. Their success inspired similar tactics across Boston. John J. Smith's barbershop became a coordination center where coded messages were passed between customers. The African Meeting House, built in 1806, served as both the spiritual and organizational heart of resistance activities. When the New England Anti-Slavery Society was founded there in 1832, one observer noted that the building itself seemed to pulse with revolutionary energy. The community's cohesion was tested most dramatically in February 1851 with the attempted capture of Shadrach Minkins. Federal marshals seized the escaped Virginia slave as he worked at his job as a waiter in the Cornhill Coffee House. But as news spread through Beacon Hill, something unprecedented happened. Within an hour, over 200 Black Bostonians surrounded the courthouse. Led by Lewis Hayden, they stormed the building, overwhelmed the guards, and spirited Minkins away to freedom in Canada. Reverend Theodore Parker called it the most noble deed done in Boston since the destruction of the tea in 1773. The rescue sent shockwaves through the federal government. President Millard Fillmore deployed federal troops to Boston, but it was too late. Minkins was already in Montreal, writing letters to friends describing his amazement at living in a place where Black children attended school with white children, where he could vote, own property, and walk the streets without fear. Philadelphia, the mother of sanctuaries. Philadelphia housed over 22,000 free Black residents by 1860, making it the largest free Black community in the world. The secret of Philadelphia's effectiveness lay in unprecedented organization that turned the entire Black community into a coordinated network of protection. William Still, son of former slaves, kept meticulous records from his Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society office. Between 1852 and 1857, Still personally assisted 485 freedom seekers, documenting the most comprehensive escape network records in history. The operation worked on multiple levels. Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, founded by Richard Allen in 1794, stood on the oldest continuously Black-owned land in the United States. Its basement contained hidden chambers for long-term shelter. But the church's real power came from its congregation, successful Black entrepreneurs providing financial resources for large-scale rescue operations. James Fortin, the wealthy sailmaker with U.S. Navy contracts, arranged passage on northbound ships. Robert Purvis, light-skinned enough to pass for white, personally escorted hundreds of fugitives through dangerous territory. When federal authorities cracked down, they discovered something unprecedented: legal resistance, led by brilliant attorneys allied with Quaker abolitionists commanding significant resources. The most dramatic example came with Jane Johnson's 1855 rescue. When the enslaved woman was discovered aboard a ship with her children, hundreds of abolitionists surrounded the vessel. In broad daylight, with federal marshals watching helplessly, Johnson walked off as a free person, protected by a crowd too large to challenge. Buxton. The impossible dream made real. 800 miles northwest of Philadelphia, something was happening that defied every assumption about race, freedom, and human potential in 19th century North America. In 1849, Reverend William King, a white Presbyterian minister from Ireland, arrived in the wilderness of Canada West with 15 formerly enslaved people and a radical vision to create a community where Black families could not just survive, but thrive. King had inherited these 15 souls when he married into a Louisiana planter family. When his wife died, he faced a choice that would reshape his destiny and theirs. Rather than sell them deeper into slavery, King freed all 15 and brought them north to build something unprecedented: a fully integrated community where former slaves would live as equals alongside white settlers. The Elgin Settlement, as it was officially known, encompassed 9,000 acres of dense forest between Lake Erie and the Thames River. King's vision was breathtaking in its audacity. Black families would purchase their own land at $2.50 per acre, build their own homes according to strict architectural standards, and educate their children in classical subjects, including Latin and Greek. By 1859, Buxton had become home to over 1,000 residents, making it the largest and most successful Black settlement in Canadian history. But the statistics only hint at the miracle that was unfolding. The community operated 3 sawmills, 2 grist mills, a brickyard, a potash factory, and numerous smaller businesses. The settlement's school was so superior that white families from surrounding areas sent their children there, creating one of the first truly integrated educational institutions in North America. What made Buxton revolutionary wasn't just its success, but the way it challenged fundamental assumptions about Black capabilities that even many abolitionists shared. Dr. Samuel Gridley Howe, sent by the American government in 1863 to study black settlements in Canada, was stunned by what he found. There are signs of industry and thrift and comfort everywhere. Signs of intemperance, of idleness, of want, nowhere. They own themselves. They are enfranchised citizens of a government which protects their rights. The educational achievements were particularly remarkable. Buxton's mission school taught the same classical curriculum as elite white academies: Latin, Greek, mathematics, natural philosophy, and rhetoric. Graduates became teachers, doctors, lawyers, and ministers. Some returned to the United States after the Civil War to establish schools for freed people. Others remained in Canada, establishing political careers that broke racial barriers throughout the region. But Buxton's greatest victory was psychological. Families who had been told for generations that they were naturally inferior, incapable of learning, destined for bondage, discovered in this wilderness community that they could achieve anything white people could. Mary Jane Robinson, a resident, wrote to friends in the United States, "I left the States for Canada, for rights, freedom, liberty. I came to Buxton to educate my children. Here they learn that they are as good as any child, no matter what color. The network that changed everything." These sanctuary communities didn't operate in isolation. By 1850, they formed a sophisticated network that spanned the continent, connected by coded letters, trusted messengers, and shared intelligence about slave catcher movements. The speed and efficiency of communication was remarkable for its time. News of dangers or opportunities could travel from Virginia to Canada in less than 2 weeks. Josiah Henson's Dawn Settlement, near Dresden, in Canada West, specialized in vocational education through the British American Institute. Students learned practical skills like millwork, carpentry, and agriculture during the day, then studied classical subjects in the evening. The settlement's lumber business became so successful that it exported timber internationally, proving that black communities could compete in global markets when given the opportunity. The Sandwich First Baptist Church, near present-day Windsor, developed ingenious warning systems for incoming fugitives. A particular bell pattern and the beginning of a specific spiritual song signaled danger, warning runaways to hide in the secret compartment beneath the church floor. Reverend Madison Mason, the church's pastor, personally sheltered over 300 freedom seekers between 1845 and 1860. Even urban communities developed sophisticated coordination networks. In New York City, the Vigilance Committee, led by David Ruggles, operated safe houses throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn. The committee maintained detailed intelligence on slave catcher activities, often warning targets days before raids occurred. When Frederick Douglass arrived in New York in 1838, committee members had him safely in New Bedford, Massachusetts, within 48 hours. The efficiency of these networks drove slaveholders to fury and desperation. The Richmond Inquirer complained in 1854. "Our slaves are being stolen by an organized conspiracy that operates with military precision. They know our weaknesses before we know them ourselves. They anticipate our movements and counter them before we can act. We are fighting not individual criminals, but entire communities dedicated to our destruction." When towns fought back, the sanctuary community's greatest test came with the passage of the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, which required all citizens to assist in capturing runaways and imposed harsh penalties on those who refused. Rather than submit, these communities chose open resistance on a scale that shocked federal authorities. In Christiana, Pennsylvania, the confrontation turned deadly. When Maryland's slaveholder Edward Gorsuch arrived in September 1851 to reclaim 4 fugitives, he expected local compliance with federal law. Instead, he encountered organized resistance led by William Parker, himself an escaped slave who had built a network of mutual protection among black families in Lancaster County. The battle at Parker's stone house became legendary. When Gorsuch demanded surrender of the fugitives, Parker's wife Eliza emerged on the upper porch and blew a horn, signaling danger to the surrounding community. Within minutes, over 50 black men and women surrounded the house, many armed with clubs, axes, and a few precious firearms. Federal Marshal Henry Klein, accompanying Gorsuch, later testified about the scene. "I had expected compliance with federal law. Instead, I found an entire community prepared for war. Women stood in doorways, shouting encouragement to their men. Children ran messages between houses. Old men who could barely walk took up positions with walking sticks as weapons. They were not afraid. They were ready to die rather than see anyone return to slavery." When the shooting stopped, Edward Gorsuch lay dead, and his son Dickinson was severely wounded. William Parker and the 4 fugitives escaped to Canada, aided by a network that moved them from safe house to safe house, with such efficiency that authorities never came close to recapturing them. 33 black men and 5 white allies were charged with treason, but community solidarity made convictions impossible. Witnesses refused to testify, juries refused to convict, and the federal government's attempt to make an example of Christiana collapsed into humiliating failure. Similar scenes played out across the North. In Syracuse, New York, the rescue of William Henry in October 1851 involved over 2,000 residents who surrounded the jail and battered down its doors. The crowd included black laborers, white abolitionists, college students, clergy, and businessmen who had decided that federal law commanded them to sin against God and humanity. Voices of transformation. The testimonies of those who found sanctuary in these communities revealed the psychological transformation that freedom made possible. Jermaine Logan, who escaped slavery in Tennessee and became a minister in Syracuse, described the moment he realized he was truly safe. "I had run so long, hidden so long, feared so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright in sunlight without looking over my shoulder. In Syracuse, for the first time since childhood, I spoke my own name aloud without fear." The educational opportunities proved especially transformative. Anna Maria Weems, who escaped from Maryland disguised as a male carriage driver, became a student at Buxton's mission school. Her letters home described an almost unbelievable reality. "I sit in the same classroom as white children. We recite the same lessons, compete for the same prizes. When the teacher calls on me, she expects the same quality of answer she expects from anyone. For the first time in my life, my mind is judged by its contents, not my skin color." James Thomas Rapier's story illustrates the long-term impact of sanctuary education. Born into slavery in Alabama, he escaped to Canada and attended Buxton School, where he mastered Latin, Greek, and classical rhetoric. After the Civil War, he returned to Alabama and became one of the first black congressmen elected from the South. His speeches in the House of Representatives, delivered in perfect classical syntax, stunned colleagues who had never imagined such eloquence possible from a former slave. The psychological impact extended to entire families. Sarah Ashley, who arrived in Philadelphia in 1853 with her 4 children, described the moment her youngest daughter asked why white children in their neighborhood played with her. "I realized that my child had never seen black and white children playing together. In slavery, such friendship was impossible. In Philadelphia, it was normal. She was growing up in a world I had never dreamed possible." The price of sanctuary. These sanctuary communities paid a heavy price for their resistance. Federal authorities subjected them to constant surveillance and harassment. Slave catchers infiltrated churches, schools, and businesses, offering rewards for information about Underground Railroad activities. Community members lived under perpetual threat of arrest, imprisonment, or worse. The financial costs were staggering. Legal defense funds consumed thousands of dollars annually. Families mortgaged their homes to post bail for arrested activists. Businesses suffered boycotts organized by pro-slavery interests. William Still estimated that Philadelphia's black community spent over $50,000 per year supporting Underground Railroad operations, a sum equivalent to over $2 million today. The psychological toll was equally severe. Living under constant threat created anxiety and paranoia that affected entire families. Children were taught never to speak about visitors to their homes. Women developed elaborate codes for discussing dangerous topics. Men carried weapons and traveled in groups whenever possible. Yet the communities persevered because they understood what was at stake. As Frederick Douglass wrote after visiting Buxton in 1858, "Here is proof that the Negro only needs an equal chance in the race of life to prove himself as worthy a competitor for all the prizes of life as any other member of the human family." The existence of this community is a standing argument against slavery and a living testimony to black capability. When the war came, the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 transformed the sanctuary communities from havens of resistance to bases of military operation. Nearly 1,000 black Canadians, many from Buxton and surrounding settlements, enlisted in Union forces. These veterans of Underground Railroad operations brought invaluable intelligence about Southern geography, plantation layouts, and escape routes. Dr. Alexander Augusta, who had studied medicine in Canada after escaping slavery, became one of the first black officers commissioned in the Union Army. His military service began with recruiting efforts in Canada West, where his knowledge of sanctuary communities helped him identify men with the skills and motivation necessary for successful military service. The sanctuary communities also became crucial in supporting contraband camps, where thousands of escaped slaves sought protection behind Union lines. William Still and other Philadelphia activists organized supply drives that sent food, clothing, medical supplies, and teachers to these camps. The educational systems pioneered in places like Buxton provided the model for freedmen's schools throughout the South. Harriet Tubman, the most famous conductor of the Underground Railroad, used her connections with sanctuary communities to support military operations. Her intelligence network, built through years of Underground Railroad work, proved invaluable for Union raids into Confederate territory. She personally led the Combahee River Raid in 1863, which liberated over 700 enslaved people in a single operation. Legacy of the impossible. When the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865, the sanctuary communities faced an unexpected challenge. Many of their residents chose to return to the United States to help build the world they had dreamed of creating. Buxton's population declined by nearly half as families relocated to participate in Reconstruction efforts. Teachers, ministers, and community leaders moved south to establish schools and churches for newly freed people. Yet the community's most important legacy lay not in their buildings or institutions, but in the proof they had provided of Black capability and potential. The children educated in Buxton's integrated classrooms became leaders across North America. The organizational skills developed in Underground Railroad networks became the foundation for civil rights organizations. The principle that communities could resist unjust laws through coordinated action became a template for future social movements. Mary Ann Shadd Cary, who had published North America's first Black woman-owned newspaper in Canada West, used her platform to advocate for women's suffrage and civil rights. Her argument that Black communities had proven their readiness for full citizenship through their achievements in sanctuary settlements became a powerful weapon against ongoing discrimination. The psychological transformation proved even more lasting. Generations of families who had experienced true equality in these communities never forgot what was possible. Their children grew up with expectations of dignity and opportunity that no amount of subsequent oppression could entirely eliminate. The truth they couldn't hide. The sanctuary communities represented something that the architects of American slavery had insisted was impossible, places where Black and white people could live, work, and learn together as equals. The success of settlements like Buxton demolished the intellectual foundations of white supremacy more effectively than any abolitionist pamphlet or political speech. Dr. Samuel Gridley Howe's 1863 report to the American government acknowledged what slaveholders had long feared. The free Negroes of Canada are as industrious, orderly, and intelligent as any class of people. Their children learn as readily as white children. Their communities prosper when given equal opportunities. There is no evidence of natural inferiority, only the artificial disabilities imposed by slavery and discrimination. The communities also proved that resistance could be sustained over time when it was based on mutual aid and collective action rather than individual heroism. The Underground Railroad succeeded not because of spectacular rescues, but because of thousands of ordinary people who chose to risk everything for their neighbors' freedom. Perhaps most importantly, these sanctuary communities demonstrated that freedom was not just the absence of slavery, but the presence of opportunity, dignity, and hope. They showed that given the chance, people who had been systematically dehumanized could create societies that embodied the highest ideals of democracy and human brotherhood. The morning after fear, Samuel Russell, the runaway who had stumbled into Harriet Hayden's parlor that February morning in 1851, lived to see slavery's end and the promise of American equality written into the Constitution. He established a successful carpentry business in Boston, sent his children to integrated schools, and served as a deacon in the African Meeting House, where he had first learned to read. But his most treasured possession remained the bowl from which he had eaten that first morning of freedom, when a stranger's kindness had shown him that the world contained more possibilities than he had ever dared imagine. That bowl represented something more powerful than any law or proclamation, the truth that human decency could triumph over human cruelty when communities chose love over fear. The sanctuary communities of the Underground Railroad era proved that ordinary people, working together with extraordinary courage, could create islands of justice in seas of oppression. They welcomed those who expected capture and offered them something more precious than food and shelter. They offered them proof that freedom was not just a dream, but a reality that could be built by human hands and sustained by human hearts. Their legacy echoes through every subsequent struggle for civil rights, every sanctuary movement, every community that has chosen to protect the vulnerable rather than abandon them. They remind us that the choice between cruelty and compassion, between exclusion and welcome, between fear and hope, is made not by governments or institutions, but by individuals who decide what kind of neighbors they choose to be. The Underground Railroad's sanctuary communities created something that slaveholders' nightmares were made of. Places where the idea that all people are created equal was not just spoken, but lived. In doing so, they proved that the most powerful resistance to oppression is not violence or rhetoric, but simply the decision to treat other human beings as if their humanity matters. And that truth, once demonstrated, could never be entirely erased.